Hi, I'm Lisa Gonzales, Chief Business Officer here in the Mount Diablo Unified School District. And in this week's episode of Ask the CBO, we're going to talk a little bit about restricted versus unrestricted funds. To start with, there are typically three types of funds or groups of funds that school districts receive. And by school districts, I'm talking about districts like Mount Diablo Unified. We are a district that receives funding based on student enrollment and not necessarily based on local property taxes. Those are basic aid school districts, and today I'm really talking about the type of funds that we receive. So we receive state funds. It's based on the number of students we have, the number of days they're in school, the characteristics of the students, because sometimes we receive funds that are allocated for specific groups of students to meet their individual needs. This is opposed to federal dollars where, again, students, characteristics, but the bulk of the federal funds really have strings attached to them. And some of those strings are very hard to be able to work around, right? Very narrow restrictions. Sometimes you have that with state funds as well. And then there's another category, and I'm just going to sort of call that category other. So grants, donations, anything that may come from foundation funds, bonds, parcel taxes that taxpayers have approved locally. So everything really falls into those three categories. But then what you need to take a look at is if you take a look at the two or three categories from the other page, you now have them broken down even further. And so you have restricted dollars. Those are certain funding accounts that have very specific timelines. They have very rigid rules. You've got reports that are required to be submitted sometimes before you receive the funds, sometimes after, sometimes along the way. But we really say that those are the ones with the strings attached versus the unrestricted. And that's where you have the most flexibility because there are no rules. Sometimes they'll have reporting requirements, but really as a school district, we have more flexibility with those funds. And so what you usually do is you want to spend your restricted dollars first because those are the ones that are hardest to spend. Versus your unrestricted, you want to do them last because that's where you get the most flexibility. You can usually carry it over from year to year if you were to choose to do that. So let me give you just a few examples and then I'll talk to you about what it really looks like. These are some examples of restricted dollars. Every single one of these can only be used for something very, very specific. Title I for students from low-income families, Title IV, academic achievement, our local control funding formula. That's what we write a local control accountability plan each year. And the LCFF funds here are really, we're talking supplemental. And so it's the dollars that are associated with certain groups of students who are designated to receive additional services. Sometimes you have grant funds and those grant funds are very specific. So they are restricted. Some of our lottery money, it's almost like a half and half with what we get. We've got some flexibility with some and some that do not have that type of flexibility. Our bond funds are GO bonds that our taxpayers have approved, measures A and C and J. Those all have very specific limitations. Even our cafeteria fund has very specific limitations. And then certainly what the public is very familiar with, the CARES Act. The CARES Act, every single one of those budget lines really has a string attached to it. It means that you can spend it for this purpose or this purpose or this purpose, but we can't put it anyplace else. Let's say on salaries if we wanted to. Here's some examples of some unrestricted funds. You can see that list is a lot smaller. So some of our local control funding formula that just comes in generally, we can use that for pretty much anything we want. We allocate it to school sites. They're able to use that a number of different ways depending on how the school site wants to do that. Some of our lottery funds, some of our donations. So you really see that a lot of what we get is tied up in restricted dollars. So why do these funds matter? Well, they really matter because often what we'll take a look at is we'll look at budgets and sometimes we'll put everything together and say this is what the total amount is. But really, those unrestricted dollars have such specific rules to them that it eliminates our ability to say, hey, we just want to take any extra restricted dollars and put them into salaries, because we can't do that. They have to be associated with certain programs. So it really takes some of that flexibility off the plate. So let me give you an example. Let's say that we're given $100,000 and we're able to buy a minivan with restricted dollars. So let's assume that this is just in your household. And I'm going to give you $100,000 and it's going to be very restricted. You're going to buy something and you want to drive to Disneyland. So let's take a look at some of the expenses you might have. So you need to buy the vehicle. I'll let you buy the vehicle. I'll let you buy the insurance. Oh, wait a second. You can't use the money to purchase gasoline. You can't use the money to change anything on the vehicle. You all of a sudden, let's say that 3 of your tires blow out. Well, you can replace your tires, but really you can't spend the money on anything else. You can spend the money on tires. So after you spend, let's say 50 of your $100,000, really all you can still do is buy tires, because the funds are so restricted, you can't use them for anything else. So I guess you could buy $50,000 worth of tires and put them in your garage, or the money sits there and you wait to see if there are going to be any changes to the restrictions, or you really can't spend it. And that's the challenge that we sometimes have with the funds that come in. Sometimes they are so incredibly restricted, you can't use them for personnel. You can't use them for materials and supplies. You can use them for a little bit of technology, but not all the technology. And so really that's what we face. And when we've got questions, we go to our auditors and we talk to them about any other flexibility. We talk to colleagues in other districts, but really for the most part, we're pretty aware of the restricted dollars and the rules that are associated with those. I know a lot of questions come up. I know that many of you have emailed me about that. So wanted to go ahead and explain restricted versus unrestricted. Remember the minivan and the trip to Disneyland. So with that said, if you've got a question about a topic that you think is confusing or you would like more information on, by all means, you can email that to cbo@mdusd.org, and I would be happy to clarify. Thanks and have a great week. Bye-bye.